The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Really lovely to see you all this morning. Joining Karen and myself are reporters everywhere. I'll come to that in a few moments' time, but it's a special edition of Squawk Box. We have got our correspondents across Europe with all the fallout from the bloc's parliamentary elections. Look where we are. We've got Sylvia in the top right corner. She's in Brussels. In Germany, outside the Brandenburg Gate, in beautiful German weather in Berlin, we have Annette. Over in Italy, we've got Claudia. Lovely to see her in Milan. And also, I tell you what, Charlotte's become the centre story in France. Well, actually Macron, but you know what I mean. Anyway, these are your headlines from London. So, as I mentioned, a shock in France. President Emmanuel Macron, he's taking a gamble, calling a snap parliamentary election after his party suffers a humiliating defeat in Sunday's EU elections.
This
is a serious and weighty decision, but above all, it's an act of trust. Confidence in you, my dear compatriots, and the ability of the French people to make the just choice for themselves and for future generations.
OK, amidst all the furore, the centre does hold, but the far right sees record support, unsettling the bloc's mainstream establishment.
The centre is holding, but it is also true that the extremes on the left and on the right have gained support, and this is why the result comes with great responsibility for the parties in the centre.
Germany's ruling coalition suffers its worst ever result as the rise of the right raises questions over the government's stability. And Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni comes out on top, solidifying her mandate and positioning herself as one of the most powerful figures in the European Union.
And of course, we're also keeping an eye on markets and market reaction, but there's a lot going on both sides of the Atlantic. European futures ticking lower after that strong jobs report. It was, as you know, hotter than expected, but this week is a pivotal week. We've got the Fed decision, we've got the dot plot, and we've got CPI all coming up later in the week. Good morning, Karen. How are you?
Good morning. Very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Quiet weekend in East Sussex, watching the events unfold all over the European theatre of operations. And what a fascinating weekend it was as well. We make no apologies pivoting to the politics more than markets first thing this morning. Plenty of time to digest all the markets a little bit later on as well. But Europe has voted. And as you can see here, people across the EU choosing a new European Parliament. Early results show a swing to the right, led by the far-right Identity and Democracy group, which added 9 seats. The Greens and centrist Renew group were the night's biggest losers, dropping 41 seats between them. But despite that far-right strength, the three centrist parties have held their majority in Parliament. Now, this potentially providing a boost to Ursula von der Leyen and her hopes of a second term.
A bigger market story, I think, than many had anticipated going into the weekend. Now, in Germany, the conservative CDU-CSU coalition won, with the far-right AfD party pushing Chancellor Scholz's SPD into third. In Italy, Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy party secured the most seats, while in Spain, the centre-right People's Party gained ground, overtaking the Socialists to move into first place. And you'll see on this map a dominance of blue and green versus what you're seeing in terms of that red that we saw last time round, which had taken over. So certainly declined there in terms of that colour scheme. Now, the biggest news of the night comes from France. Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party gained 12 seats to secure 30 in total, with President Macron only narrowly avoiding falling into third place behind the centre-left. Now, in response to the vote, Macron delivered a political shock, calling a surprise parliamentary elections, with the first round of voting at the end of this month.
This is a serious and weighty decision, but above all, it's an act of trust. Confidence in you, my dear compatriots, and the ability of the French people to make the just choice for themselves and for future generations.
Well, I'm proud to say we've got a fantastic team across Europe. As you know, Claudia covering events with Meloni and everything that she will be doing next as well. We've got Annetta covering Berlin as well, and Olaf Scholz had a really bad night. Of course, Sylvia will be looking at things at the core of Brussels. But Charlotte, you have become the centre. And by the way, what a beautiful shot outside the parliamentary buildings in Paris this morning. Macron, I was actually, I actually searched up what throwing the toys out of the pram was in French, and I was going to bring it to you this morning. But actually, has he thrown the toys out of the pram, or has he made a very calculated gamble that actually if Marine Le Pen's party does get in to form some form of government, she's got to prove what kind of government it is 2 years ahead, of course, or 2.5 years ahead of what will be the presidential election in 2027.
And that's really the key here, a huge political gamble. That reminds you a little bit to what Pedro Sanchez did last year after he was trailing in the polls and called this snap surprise election. That's a little bit the element of surprise when President Macron spoke yesterday, just an hour after the results came of the European election, showing his party getting a bruising defeat so far behind the far right. Because look, the far right has been in the lead in the past 2 European elections before last night as well. But the gap and the advance that they have ahead of all the other parties was the most crucial element here at 31.5% of the vote. And if you add the other far right parties, they are at around 40% of the total vote at the European election in France. The second was President Macron's party at just 14.5% here. So out of the 81 MEPs in the European Parliament, 30 will be from the Rassemblement National. And that's this huge gap, this huge advance that the country was taken stock of, and that's why President Macron then announcing, and now after the result, that he was dissolving the National Assembly, the building just behind me, and the narrative entirely shifted. It was all about this and what would happen, because the first round of this election will be just in 3 weeks. So that's the legal minimum for calling an election and actually having the election just 3 weeks before the first round, and the second round a week later. And that is the crucial element here. A parliamentary election is a 2-round election, unlike the European one. So the result could be quite different. So we shouldn't project entirely what we saw in the European results here, what it could mean for the National Assembly. But in the last National Assembly election, just a couple of years ago, the far right did progress. They came third as party in Parliament. So speaking yesterday, Marine Le Pen said that her party was ready for the parliamentary election and was ready to lead the country.
I can only welcome this decision, which is in line with the logic of the institutions of the Fifth Republic. We're ready for it. After the legislative elections of 2022, which designated the National Rally Party as the main parliamentary opponent, these European elections confirm our movement as the major force for change in France. We are ready to exercise power if the French people place their trust in us in these future legislative elections. We're ready to turn the country around, ready to defend the interests of the French, ready to put an end to mass immigration, ready to make the purchasing power of the French a priority. We're ready to start the reindustrialization of the country. In short, we're ready to turn the country around, ready to revive France.
And that's what was remarkable of this European election campaign, is that it wasn't on European issues at all. It was very much on domestic issues, cost of living crisis. It had a bit of a flavor of a midterm for President Macron, because this election was the only big one during his mandate. The parliamentary election was 2 years ago, and the presidential election is not until 2027. So that was the big election here in the middle, as well. President Macron saying, look, I've heard your discontent. It's only fair that now I give you the choice to vote again here on a domestic front. Now, when it comes to the dissolution, there's been just a few in France. The last one is in 1997. It was a pretty disastrous one for President Chirac. So we have to wait and see what it means here. But certainly a huge political gamble by President Macron, trying to catch by speed the far right and all the other party, and try to maybe kind of stop the progress of the far right potentially with having this election in just 3 weeks. But this could also open the door to having the first far-right government and prime minister. So the developments over the next 3 weeks will be absolutely crucial for France, but of course for Europe as well.
Charlotte, I just want to weigh in with a couple of twos here that could be relevant. 2 rounds of the election when it comes to France. How is that different as we talk about elections in France versus what we've just seen over the weekend at the European parliamentary level? Also, the other two here is that there wasn't just one far-right party that showed some dominance. There was a second far-right party to challenge Marine Le Pen. How relevant is that as we talk about legislative elections in France?
No, and that's really the key, that it is a 2-round election, and that means that in the second round, you always had this kind of cordon sanitaire. So if you had several parties going through to the second round, some parties would just drop out. The third or the fourth party, they would just drop out to leave just one party facing the far right if they got in the lead. But this has been kind of dissolving slowly, and the cordon sanitaire is not so much a reality anymore. So we'll have to wait and see what that means. But certainly in the last parliament, the far right was the third largest political force. They had 89 MPs out of 577. The Renaissance, of President Macron's party, was still the largest one, but they lost already the absolute majority compared to the previous mandate. Now, the left wing, they had a coalition last time, so they managed to be the second force in parliament. But they have had huge tensions within the left-wing party between the Greens, the Socialists, and the far left. And so that means that this coalition could dissolve. That could also give some ammunition for the far right to actually score better. So all this is at play over the next few days, whether coalitions can be formed or whether this opens a big way for the far right.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed for that great coverage out of Paris, and we'll see you a little bit later on as well. So let's get straight to Brussels, where Sylvia has been digesting these results from across the continent. Sylvia, I've seen a couple of very interesting comments. Does it make von der Leyen weaker? Does it make her stronger? The argument that makes her stronger is she can work on either side with parties from the left and the right as well. Weaker, of course, but in some ways because the centre took such a drubbing in terms of what Olaf Scholz had, in terms of what Macron had in their results. But also saw a comment here from Simon Hicks, political professor at the European University Institute in Florence. Says, kiss goodbye to the European Green Deal. Why don't you just digest everything from your point of view?
There's so many things to unpack, Steve. First and foremost, what we're looking at is a more fragmented European Parliament that is clearly leaning more toward the right. However, the centrist parties still hold a majority. And yesterday night, they were telling me here that they will work together to make sure that the far-right lawmakers will not have a stronger influence in European policy making. Now, when it comes to the future of Ursula von der Leyen, she indeed can choose very well if she wants to work more closely with the centrist parties, where she's going to look more toward the right to get a majority in the European Parliament. Ultimately, what we heard from her last night is actually that she's going to avoid looking at the far right, because she said these parties do not share the same European values. Here's the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, outlining basically her direction of travel, really, for the next couple of months.
No majority can be formed without EPP, and together, and that is important, and Manfred, you said it, together with others, we will build a bastion against the extremes from the left and from the right. We will stop them.
So given the results, given the clear message from European voters that what they want to see is a parliament that it is clearly more on the right of the political spectrum, the question here for the European Parliament lawmakers is, can the right actually work together? And yesterday night I had the chance to speak to a lawmaker from the ultra-conservative group, the ECR. That's the same group that the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, belongs to. And the message that I got was actually they're not going to look at the far-right lawmakers, the Identity and Democracy group, because they do not work well in the European Parliament. They do not do their jobs well. And at the same time, once again, they do not share the same values.
We have a program. We want center-right policy. So we have been working a lot with APP in the past years, and with other colleagues in the Parliament. Actually, with people who work. I sometimes didn't see some people from ID actually doing some work. Anyone who finds some work that they did can show it to me, then I will just believe that I'm myself, that I'm blonde. I mean, it's impossible to see any result, and we have some results. You can see it in the data, you can see it in the rankings, but member of parliament from ID did ever achieve any result. I mean, you can work with people when they work. That's one thing. And second, we want to work according to our values. And these values are very clear: to serve the European citizens, to defend the European way of life. And we are against illegal migration, but we are not against people. We want people to respect the European values, to comply with our values.
Ultimately, though, what does this all mean? Guys, it is likely that what we're going to see for the next 5 years, it's going to be harder and slower to get things done here in Brussels. And indeed, to answer your question, Steve, perhaps climate policy is actually the biggest loser out of these results. I was speaking to a Green lawmaker yesterday, and he said that he does not think that the ongoing legislation will be rolled back. For instance, that includes putting an end to some diesel cars by 2035. However, the future, the next 5 years of policymaking here in Brussels when it comes to green policies could be at risk.
Sylvia, I just want to weigh in with some market reaction here, because we have seen euro lose most of its gains from the past month, and we're setting up for a reaction to in bond markets. It feels as though the environment has subtly changed after the weekend, where we've had not much politics in the pricing here. Just walk us through what you think may have changed now thanks to this result.
Well, it's the fragmentation, and it is what I said to you earlier, that it is likely that it will be harder to get things done. Yes, the EU, at times of crisis, they do manage to come together, even when the Council, the Parliament, is fragmented. So perhaps an event such as the US election could actually put pressure on the EU to come together. However, the outcome does suggest that it's going to be more fragmented European policy making. It will be harder to get things done, and naturally, the markets do not enjoy that.
Sylvia, thank you very much. I think it's fair to say there's been a lot of cohesion on the back of the COVID era. We've seen cohesion when it comes to policy around digital, around green transition. But I wonder whether we're seeing a change now thanks to the rise of the far right, and whether that comes back into bond markets where it hasn't been there for a while, right? So that's going to be interesting to watch. Well, coming up on the show, Germany's ruling coalition. We're closely watching that it suffers a humiliating setback in the EU elections, while Italy's Giorgia Meloni reinforces her leadership at home and looks to strengthen her influence in Brussels.
Ambition to me is about doing better.
I think ambition creates a pathway.
The best advice I can give to someone starting off a career is don't have a career, have lots of careers, try loads of different things.
Talk to people and put your ambition out there.
I don't feel that I've hit peak ambition because it's a learning journey.
CNBC is where ambition meets opportunity. What does living ambitiously mean to you? Hear it from our CNBC anchors, reporters and global business leaders on CNBC.com.
Some political risk returning to Europe on the back of the European parliamentary elections, and what we're seeing across the board, red arrows, but in retreat here on these markets. Don't forget Wall Street was also slightly lower, so we are picking up on that negative lead from the US markets. As we closed out Friday, we were on the back foot, modestly lower, although we did trade higher for most of the trading week across on these boards. Let me show you foreign exchange markets, because this is where we've seen most of the election result expressed. Euro dollar this morning, we're 107.50, so we've lost altitude. About a 1 month low is where we're travelling. We're around roughly the 108.90 handle going into the weekend. So a fair amount of slippage is what we've witnessed. To the European yields, and already there's a suggestion we'll see those yields tick higher. 262 on Bunds this morning. 3.4 is close to that level on the Spanish paper. On Italy, we're just shy of 4% in OATs, 3.10. So we're watching the reaction on the sovereigns closely, Steve.
Thanks, Karen. OK, Germany's ruling coalition suffered a severe setback in Sunday's European parliamentary election. The Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats returned their lowest vote share ever, at just 14%. Their partners, the Greens and Free Democrats, also suffered losses. The actual centre-right's Christian Democrats, well, they led with 30% of the vote, whilst the far-right Alternative for Germany, they made significant gains, finishing second with nearly 16%. Annetta, many questions. What does this mean for Olaf Scholz and his authority and his coalition?
Well, in theory, or you would say that he also has to call for snappy election because clearly they don't have enough support among the electorate. But in reality, that does not need to necessarily happen because Olaf Scholz is a man who has a tendency to cling on power, and he will not ask for a vote of confidence. But because one thing is clear, what happens then, we need to have snap elections or new elections, and that would be the end of the SPD being part or being at least at the top of a coalition governing Germany. So the big two winners here on the ground are the CDU with a final or preliminary final result of more than 30%. That was like at least the rumored threshold for Friedrich Merz being the chancellor candidate or the most likely chancellor candidate for the next general election next year in September. And of course, the alternative for Germany, the AfD, the right-wing populist party, also had a very huge success, especially in the east of Germany, where they are actually the most successful party, coming in first in almost all countries. Perhaps we listen in for that, what the co-head of the AfD had to say about the election result.
We have achieved a great result, the second strongest force and the strongest force in the east of our country. All the prophecies of doom after the barrage of the last few weeks, we are the second strongest force. And I'm telling you, it's still going up tonight. It's still going up.
So the practical implications here for political Berlin are the following, because we're heading into a round of budget negotiations for 2025. And of course, the pressure is on Olaf Scholz to actually deliver when it comes to this, and also to bring more SPD politics into these budget negotiations. And that, of course, is in contradiction to what the liberals under Christian Lindner want in these budget negotiations. So there is a chance that one of those parties might actually walk out of that coalition because of that, even more pressure from the European election. So we have to really watch carefully of what happens with those negotiations. Of course, the Greens, the poor showing of the Greens is another topic here in Berlin as well, and probably will also have ramifications for energy politics going forward. For example, Friedrich Merz, the head of the CDU, is already calling for a U-turn when it comes to the end of combustion engines across Europe, because clearly that's at the heart of their party agenda. But that, back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for that. OK, well, we've covered the weakness at the centre for Macron and for Scholz. But my goodness me, Giorgia Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy party, secured the most votes and seats in Italy, securing a higher vote share than in the 2022 election, which saw the party enter government. Isn't that interesting? The centre-left Democratic Party also grew its vote share, with Meloni's right-wing coalition rivals losing ground. Well, Claudia, I mean, I've gone through a couple of the bullets there, but where's the nuance, where's the subtlety here? It looks like a very good night for Mrs. Meloni.
It really was. She is the big winner here in Italy and probably throughout Europe. I mean, her party came in, as you said, with more votes than in the 2022 election. So this was sort of a test for her coalition, and a test that she did pass with flying colors. She did come in with 29% of the votes for her party, Fratelli d'Italia. The coalition with Forza Italia and Lega also were able to maintain strong levels. An inversion there between Lega, who was ahead of Forza Italia, and now Forza Italia beating the Lega. 9.7% of the votes went to Forza Italia, 9.2% went to Lega. So putting this coalition firmly still in control. There will be, of course, some concern about what happens within this coalition because of this change within the coalition of who is the second most important party. But this isn't expected to really weigh at all in terms of how the coalition will be able to govern moving forward. So again, a clear victory. Giorgia Meloni, it's a victory that, as she herself said, means more than the one 2 years ago, because 2 years ago it was a vote for hope. This time it's a vote of confidence. This is what she had to say.
It is a message that comes to us from all Italians. Go ahead, go ahead. I take it as someone's message to say go ahead and do it, if possible with greater determination. A sign that I understand, a sign that I am ready to seize. And I am proud that we are heading to the G7 and to Europe with the strongest government of all. This is something that has not happened in the past, and it's happening today. It is a satisfaction and also a great responsibility. We must be aware of that responsibility.
Looking forward, of course, now it will be interesting to see what role she will play within Europe. So for Giorgia Meloni, elections are passed. She's moving on, looking forward to the G7, as she is now moving on to the next step. But as far as the PD is concerned, you were mentioning they also did quite well. Eli Schlein, who is the new head of the Partito Democratico, has been heading up that group for almost a year, got 24% of the vote. So what's interesting here is two women leading the two biggest parties that got over 50% of the vote, but with yet a quite low voter turnout, the lowest in Italy's history, right below the 50% level.
Thank you for listening to Squawk Box Europe Express.
For more market-moving news, you can head to cnbc.com.
Or join us again on the show with Steve Sedgwick, Karen Cho, and myself, Arabile Kumete, weekdays on CNBC.